Hello, and welcome to this week's installment of the Coffee Chat series. I'm your host, Kyra Dawkins, along with my incredible co-host, Mackenzie Finklea. And this week, we're going to be talking very explicitly about probably one of the most integral skill sets we need to have as authors, being able to leverage our professional networks throughout our book journey. So we're so excited to bring our panelists on today. And so, without further ado, hello, panelists.
Hello.
Would you two like to introduce yourselves? How about we start with Professor Koester?
Sure. Well, great to have. Thank you guys so much for having, and I'm excited to. I'm a longtime viewer, first-time caller, as they always famously say. So I'm glad to be with you all, and I love the work that you guys are doing. And I will say first and foremost, I'm an author. I've written 5 books. My newest one's coming out here on the fiction side, my first one. So I'm following in Kyra's path here of being a novelist. And it comes out for pre-sale in March. And I also get the chance to work with lots and lots of authors through the work at Georgetown and through the Book Creators Experience. And I will tell you, I think the biggest thing that I love about this community is just the fact that we sort of don't hide from talking about the fact that like books don't magically sell themselves. You kind of have to learn how to do it. And so it's a skill that you can build, but it's a practice, right? It's one of those things that like the daily habits really, really matter. So I think it's exciting to talk about how it's not like rocket science. It's not scary. It's just like a process. And so I always love talking about it.
All right, my turn. Hello, everyone. I'm Satish Shenoy. My day job is a technology executive working for a leading technology company in software automation. I have worked and lived all over the world, which is probably relevant to this topic because hence I've been able to enjoy lots of different connections, traveled over 40 countries, lived in 4 of them across 2 continents. I enjoy building alliances and partnerships in my day job and leading a team to do so across the Americas. Now, I'm also an author, and that's the one big reason I'm here. And I've really enjoyed being part of the Creative Institute led by Professor Koester, and also getting to know the author coaches, Mackenzie and Kyra. And I'm a first-time author, so this is all new to me, but I've really, really enjoyed being part of this journey, and glad to be here. Thank you both for inviting me.
We're really excited to have you, and we're excited to ask you our list of questions today. And as always, as we're asking questions, if audience members who are watching have any additional questions, drop them in the chat. There will be a Q&A opportunity at the end of this edition of Coffee Chats, as always. So our first question for you guys, as you just listed all of these credentials that you have, you are both very active on LinkedIn, which is a great place to grow your professional network. So we were wondering what your daily routine on LinkedIn looks like.
Satish, I'll let you take it up first, and I'll follow on you.
Okay. So I typically start with my day, in fact, with a little bit of reading and all that. But as part of that routine is morning routine is checking LinkedIn. I will admit, I don't do Facebook, I don't do Instagram, but I do LinkedIn because that's a huge part of my engagement with that virtual community. So, part of my job is also engaging with people. So LinkedIn is a big part of the morning routine. I typically answer any messages that have come up, or look at what the news is, if you will. If you think of LinkedIn feed as a virtual news feed, especially in the space I'm in technology. And so it's a really fun thing to do, but I try not to do it for too long in the morning. I try to come back during the day, maybe 2, 3 times, and check in really. So that's it.
So I will say I had I used to find social media was really distracting, particularly so for the last year I've been working on my own writing projects pretty heavily. And so one of the things that I started to really do is to batch my way that I use social. So I on the weekends will typically block off a little bit of time and write several posts that I plan to post throughout the week. So I will write those things, I will just put them in, and I just sort of do it when I have a free minute, I kind of type them on my phone and I leave them there. And then I kind of have a loose sort of agenda. I wouldn't say I'm particularly formal about it, but I sort of have some posts to do because those can take a little bit of time and thought to do it. And especially if you don't get to it and you can't carve out time, it doesn't happen. So that's the first thing. I try to batch my process behind it. And I try to sort of see if I can post something, at least sort of 3 to 4 times a week that's sort of some substance or heft behind it. So I try to post something regularly. The second thing is I am a big believer in the idea of going through LinkedIn, and I try to go through it about once or twice a day for about a 10-minute block of time, and to use that as my celebratory time. And so I've learned a lot about using social networks is that you certainly want to share things that you can, but the biggest thing that I think you can do is for every one thing you share, you should celebrate 10 other people or other things. So I always try to go through and sort of say oh, I love this, this is really great or really exciting, or this is interesting, or have you thought of, and it's not long, but I try to do that in particular when you see something good. And there's 2 things that happen when you do that. Number one, it's just good karma. There's good stuff that comes out of it. People are certainly positive. But here's the other thing. When you comment on posts that you find positive, the algorithm optimizes to show you better stuff that you want to do. There's a positive side of it. So that's a really, really big thing that I've started to realize is for some people, they're oh gosh, I feel it's not what I want to see when I get in there, but optimizing around really giving comments on things that I like has optimized that for me. So that's kind of my thing. I have a couple of posts that I write on the weekends. I try to share them throughout the week. And then when I do go on, I try to be very heavily on celebrate other things. And that's sort of my routine.
I love that piece of advice because yesterday, Kyra and I were talking with the Audience Building Bootcamp about 5-minute favors.
Yep.
And that is exactly what that is. So for every one thing you do, you should be celebrating, 10 other people doing things. And that's awesome. And I do have a follow-up question actually for you, Satish, is why LinkedIn and not the others?
It's a great question. I think it's partly because for me, LinkedIn is, by the way, I was going to add that ever since I became an author, some of the things that Professor Koester was talking about makes so much more, it's so much more important, right? In terms of celebrating others, making them part of your community. And then you can see this almost like a karma come back to you, right? Yeah. Because you call it 5-minute favors or something else. It's really, when you give without expectation, things come back. And I mean, that's so true for me with LinkedIn or maybe to an extent with Facebook. Now to your question, Mackenzie, about why LinkedIn and not the others. For me, LinkedIn provides the most value, right, in terms of what I want to consume, right, as a technology leader and an author. I will say, I used to be a Facebook junkie a long time ago, but from a LinkedIn standpoint, I find, especially as an author, I find that there's a lot of valuable insights, quotes, things that I love to read. I think somebody said the best authors are the best readers or leaders. And so that's really what it is. I think there's so much content and good content on LinkedIn that's useful and enriches our lives, right? I was reading an article yesterday on the Wall Street Journal. In fact, I'm happy to share it. They talked about LinkedIn in comparison to the other social media and why it's quickly becoming a social media of choice, whether you like it or not, because one of the things that LinkedIn has recently done is taken political discourse out of, I don't know if you know this, but within LinkedIn, you have the ability to filter out political discourse, or I mean, they're trying to keep, noise out of there. So if you will, so that you can really focus and get the most out of it. A little long-winded, but hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I loved that answer, because the biggest thing I took away was it's the place where you find the most value in what you want to consume. And I think that's great advice for other users looking at all of the social media options and getting completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, to say the least. And I actually have one last follow-up question pertaining to LinkedIn for both of you. So, kind of building off of Mackenzie's question about why LinkedIn over other platforms, there are lots of assumptions made about the kinds of people who use LinkedIn and where they are in relation to their careers. So what advice would you give to someone who feels like they want to contribute to a professional discourse that they aren't experts in?
So I'll maybe take a first stab at it. And my kind of general philosophy on how you sort of engage is, I think, if you think about like using social networks, and LinkedIn is a good one. Imagine that it wasn't a social network, but it was like a real world experience. So imagine you're walking into a room and there's like all these people in there. I think what sometimes people think about is they're like, okay, I'm going on LinkedIn, I should just post a bunch of stuff. Well, that's what, like, basically if you walked into a room and said, hey, everybody, I'm here, like, just wanted to let everyone know how this is going. Like, that's the way that it would be, right? Like, no one would do that in the real world, right? So what I always think is important is you join, right? And you join and you start to find those little circles. So there are like smaller groups for things like that. There's all that kind of stuff behind it. But first you join, then you celebrate. And what starts to happen is you'll build other people around you that you'll sort of have these things. So it's almost like you go up to a table and you start saying, oh, that's a really great story. That's a really great story. And then what starts to happen is you can start to contribute. Then you can start to share more things behind it. And then you can start to ask for things along the way. So I think like my philosophy about like, this in any ways is I think that it's about like consistency more than anything, as opposed to like, it's less of a broadcast and more of a conversation if you can make that happen. And that's where I think like part of it is like, you just have to, as you heard from both of us, you kind of just have to show up every day, and you kind of have to not try to be like the center of attention or those things behind it. You just have to sort of share. And it is interesting, like when you watch those things over time, LinkedIn still does have pretty big organic reach relative to things like Facebook or relative to things like Instagram. There is a lot of people who see posts, which is surprising how well that is. So that's one of the reasons I think it's interesting. But again, I always tell people when you're looking to use a new social network, and I think a lot of people are familiar with networks like, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and maybe even TikTok to some degree. But I think LinkedIn is just a new platform that not everyone uses. They think about it just for jobs. But if you go in with like, hey, I'm joining this new room, that kind of gives you a sense to think about it of how it would be. And don't walk in and sort of tell them like, hey, everyone, look at me. Like, no one, that's not how you would do it in the real world.
I would, Professor Koester, that was really nice way to kind of describe the experience on LinkedIn. I will say, to me, it's about, if you look at what you know, what you love, and what you care about. I mean, I don't want to make it sound soft, because it's a very professional network, right? But then it's really about what you know, love, and care. If it's those things you post about, then, or engage with people, if you have that behind you when you post, then people will respond positively, I think, and they'll engage with you, because you can tell when you look at a post in LinkedIn or any other social media, you can tell that it's coming from a good place, that it's authentic. And when you think about know, love, and care, it will come from the right place.
Totally. So yeah, when it does come time to use the megaphone, when you've engaged and then you allow yourself to shout to everyone, this is kind of a segue into the next question, specifically for authors. When did you tell your connections about your book journey? When did you start talking about it through the megaphone?
I can go first, Professor Koester. I did this announcement back in early November, so I knew my pre-sale campaign was coming up. I will tell you, I felt a lot of pressure in terms of wanting to make the announcement sooner than I did. But it was, I remember it was a beautiful Saturday morning. I was sitting there thinking, maybe I should do it. It's time. And I told a little story about what led me to writing, making the announcement or writing this book, and the announcement tied to the book. And, this is one of my most favorite posts ever. And, it came from that part of me, right? It was genuine. The whole book is about some things I was able to accomplish and hopefully inspire others. But really that's where it came from, right? 24,000 views later and hundreds of comments. I was thinking, how did this happen? How could this happen, right? But it's really that organic thing, right, where you celebrate for others, you give, and then when it comes time, they're there to celebrate with you, and they're there to push you up and say that this is amazing and all that, right? So that's when it happened, and I can't forget that time. So thank you. Over to you, Professor.
Yeah, and I think it sort of fits into those ones. I don't, I think sometimes, and I'll say, it happens in general, but I think we sometimes overweight singular events versus consistency of sharing the journey. And I think that's really what's interesting. So for me, I have written books before, and, and sort of hopefully in my life constantly writing books. Like that's kind of the thing. And so sometimes we can overthink about like, I have to have this perfect announcement and like this, you get the trumpets from the angels and stuff. I don't really think that that's sort of nearly as important as just consistently sharing things about your journey, about what you're learning and those things behind it. Because I do think that while it's great to have sort of that one message, remember LinkedIn algorithms and all the algorithms are sort of one of those things where they decide what's going to happen. And so you might have the perfect magical post and it might have 100 views on it. And then you do something that's like, hey, like, I talked to Joe today and it was really interesting about my book, and like 24,000 people will see it. So it's weird. You can't sort of do those things. So I think what's important is like, number one, consistency, like sharing things regularly about it. But the second thing that I think is also important is I do think that if you watch on a lot of these platforms, that stories really do matter, and being able to talk in stories and think in stories. So when I always sit down, I usually ask myself the question, especially when I'm writing posts on the weekends when I'm doing it, I always start with like, where was I? Who else was there and what happened, right? Like those are the three things that I do. Like, where was I? Who else was there and what happened? And that's kind of the things behind it. And so it's a conversation I had about this book, or it's a conversation I had with my daughters, or here's what we learned together. And so a lot of those like ideas of like starting with the fact that you want to tell stories really has helped me make better, more engaged posts. I do find like I'm not like the pithy, like, hey, here's a fun quote that you like, I haven't found those to be my jam, right? I like to sort of think about like, here's a story and try to do my best to tell it, because that helps me with my storytelling, number one. But number two, I think that's what kind of I get the most engagement on. So I would say I tell stories about my journey that may not, and I don't even necessarily need to do a big book announcement. I'm much more consistent about trying to say, here's what I'm learning, here's what happened to me.
That's great advice, because often, when it comes to writing posts, you sit there thinking, where do I begin? What do I say? Yeah. And if you can start with asking yourself those questions, of the moment that you want to talk about, who else was there? Where did it happen? What was the third thing?
Yeah. So where were you? Who else was there? And what happened? Like those or what was said.
Oh, so I said all three things. Yeah.
All
not in order. All the things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also really appreciate the emphasis on consistency, because something that I actually remember learning from Professor Koester was it's important that you keep people plugged into your journey before you ask anything of them. Mm-hmm. So if you just say like, hi, there's this thing, now support me. Like you have to like build this story long term and invite them into something that already has proven to be sustainable. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a very important thing to bear in mind too.
Yeah, and I think it's also just like, again, if you go back to this idea, and I think sometimes people who are, who've not spent a lot of time using social media or not really active on a platform will think of it as this marketing activity, but social network is really just designed around normal human interactions, just in a virtual space. So really that's what's happening, and I think of it, whatever your organizations you're a part of, like think about your religious affiliation. Like, what is it like when you go to the church and like, have those experiences? Like you participate, you're active, you like, you do all those things behind it. But I think part of it is like, we overthink this as like, it's this thing that really isn't rooted in what it is. And I think that's really where I have found the people who I admire the most. It is feel like you're kind of there with them, part of their journey, like it's just authentic to them. And I think that's just an important one. Is I always ask myself the question is like, what would it be like if this was in real person? Would it be the same sort of thing, or would it feel different in that way? And that makes it just easier to have that lens behind it. Is like, hey, I'm going to church, or I'm going to the Elks Club, or I'm going to the Alumni Association. Like, how would I engage there? And that helps a lot.
I have never thought about it that way. Like, what would it be like if this was in real person? But that is like the root of every like post I've ever seen that has made me feel like, ooh, a little uncomfy. Is like, if that person was saying that to me in person, it would sound weird. That's probably why I didn't like it. and
I will just take a bit. I want to brag on Mackenzie for a little bit too, and both of you actually. So I, obviously follow both your social medias, and I will say one of the things that's fun, and I think, I've known you both for a while, but it's interesting. Like, I think the posts that both resonate with me is it feels like that I'm having a real conversation with you. I'm kind of watching you. So like Kyra, when you kind of do your, here's what I'm thinking about right now. Like, I feel those ones, or when Mackenzie's kind of like, I think I've enjoyed Mackenzie on TikTok. I don't know what your hashtag is on TikTok, but follow Mackenzie on TikTok. But you sort of like are doing this very much. It's like, it feels like the cheeky you. And it feels like, even though I didn't talk to you, I kind of almost is like, I felt like, oh, like I was kind of there for that moment. So it's interesting, like the more human we are in these places, the better it is. And so each of you have your like quirks that are lovely, right? And I think when you put those on display, people are like, oh, like there's my Mackenzie, there's my Kyra, right? And that's, I think, what's so neat about it is like, it is so fun to see those things. And even like having watched authors, some of my favorite things are when authors do like nutso things that maybe seem like they wouldn't be professional, but they kind of just work as a result of it. Like, it's just, doing things that are fun, doing things that are interesting. Like, I oftentimes will bring my daughters on or post things of us doing like, and those are the ones that people enjoy. I think the line sometimes between, work and life are very much blurred. And so I think you kind of just have to be your authentic self. And that seems to be the best way that things work really well.
Totally. Make it fun. Otherwise, why do it? Totally why spend the time on it?
Yeah.
All right, Kyra, would you like to ask our guest the next question?
Yes, I was trying to make a clever segue, but that is the best one. So, so bearing in mind that, again, human connection is really important, but of course, like, as we make human connections, that tends to open doors for us, even if it's just opening doors to new relationships. But as you've done that, how did your book create new opportunities for you? Or books?
I'm happy to take it, Professor. So when we first started the pre-sale campaign, I remember thinking 300 people. I want to reach out to 300 people. Most of those people, I mean, some of them I've been in constant touch with because of social media, but quite a number of them I'd not spoken to in years. I mean, in fact, one of my couple of my friends I'd not spoken to in 20 years. And it was amazing to really make that connection back. And if there's only one reason, if I was told what's one reason that you like about writing a book, that's that connection that I was able to make, right? The second thing I would say is, this whole credibility, the idea of, if you think of the word authority, there is the word author in it, which tells you that maybe there is some connection where, because you're an author, you're now considered an authority, whether it's true or not. You're considered an authority from that angle, right? So, and then meeting some amazing people and expanding your network. That's the third thing I would say. I recently wrote to an ex-Navy SEAL, because Navy SEALs are in my book, Run and Grow Rich. And can you imagine somebody writing back and saying, I'd love to talk to you? And it's like, oh my God, I'm talking to a Navy SEAL, Delta Force commander, a doctor, right? So that's coming up soon. So those kinds of people that you could never imagine that you would have come across. I mean, going back to Professor Koester's example, in real life, could I go up to this person and just introduce myself out of the blue? I don't know. Maybe, because I'm a pretty extrovert guy, but maybe not, because he'll think, who the heck is this guy, right? But when he can check out my profile and see who I am and what I'm doing, maybe he's more open to it, right? So those, I'll stop there because I know we're short on time, but over to you, Professor.
Yeah, I mean, so, this is sort of the whole reason why I kind of started this class, is just because of the fact that, like, my first book sort of changed my entire life. And I think what I'll tell you, and I'll kind of answer this maybe a little bit of like a researchy way, because I think we have the, sort of different parts of it. But what's interesting about it is I think that today, what we're seeing in life is that a lot of the prior signals of ambition and success are sort of being muted. And so we used to sort of define people who are, by what school you got into or what companies you worked at and things like that. And what's interesting about those signals, we call them today, like the signals that are out there, is that they're a general signal. And so it sort of says nothing about you, but the fact that, like, you go to school X, we can assume that you are part of that general cadre of people who went to school X, but it doesn't say anything specifically about you. I think what's changing today is that there are now signals that are about us. And so just because, Kyra goes to school X, it doesn't necessarily mean that defines nearly as much about her as knowing that she has this love of language and she has this love of, creative things like that. So I think what's interesting to understand is that today, like, the world is now much bigger. And also there's much more, like, there's more niches that you can be a part of that are much more aligned. So, for example, there's just these opportunities now where I'm sure, Kyra, you've met probably hundreds of people that are into linguistics and these historical things, like, that sort of happens. And so what I'll flip this back out to people in a general sense of why I believe books are something that anyone who's ambitious should consider is because it's a new way to signal your interest and find more people who are like you. And that's really what's neat about it, is that, like, I had no idea, like, with my first book, that there were other people who were interested in kind of being entrepreneurial and looking at the kind of the clean tech space. But suddenly, like, the internet connected to me to, like, hundreds and thousands of people in that way. So it's kind of this way to think about, right, sort of like general signals, like, hey, I'm ambitious, versus very niche things that are interesting in it. So that's what I'd sort of say is it's like, it's a little bit like putting up a homing beacon now to say, these are the things that I care about here. And suddenly other people can say, oh, cool. Like, you like, oh, interesting. Like, me too. And so, like, hummingbirds fly to us when we put our signals up, or whatever mixed analogies I use there. But that's why I think books are so interesting, is because people are attracted to them because they see themselves in those things. And so it is this really interesting way to signal about you and you specifically, as opposed to signal about you generally. It doesn't really matter that I went to Marquette. Like, that doesn't really define me, but it does define me that I have these interests and these passions. And suddenly people who are like that are drawn to that piece of it. So there's my academic answer for you.
Can I add one more quick thing? I know we're running out of time.
Go for it.
The one thing I will add to what Professor said was, in addition to being that beacon and attracting people, what I've found is it actually opens up newer and better possibilities, right? When you announce your intention and you draw people to you, now with those people, you're creating newer things that are bigger and better than you ever thought possible, right? So that to me is amazing.
Yeah.
Very much. And just so you know, we have the whole hour, not just the half hour.
Oh.
If you were counting down to 30 minutes. We usually don't take up the whole hour, but we have that time.
All right. So then can we also talk about what if I look at the book journey, and I was just thinking, I'm writing about running marathons all over the world. I will tell you, writing a book has been much, much harder than running a marathon. And I would rather run a marathon than write a book because of right when I was thinking about what the book journey has created in terms of opportunities, it has helped me realize that there are easy, what we consider hard outside, before you write a book, may actually be easier. So, just count your blessings always.
I would rather write a book than run a marathon. So I'll flip it back around to you. I only run when chased. So, like, not my jam.
I don't think I could run a marathon if I wanted to.
Yeah.
It would take a while. I
pretty.
couldn't today.
Yeah.
I come
Maybe
from a
once you read
marathon
my book,
family.
you'll be ready. Sorry.
Oh,
Go
you're
ahead.
fine. No, exactly. So, I mean, bearing in mind the opportunity for, I mean, I guess, again, your book really does put things into perspective. Just engaging in your book journey, again, allows you to open new opportunities for yourself and to, again, build relationships. But we don't build relationships with just anyone. As Professor Koester was saying, like a book is a signal for the kinds of people that you find yourself being drawn to, and those people being drawn to you over shared interests. So, when you're looking to expand your network, how do you choose who you reach out to? Like, is there like are there parameters that you search for, or is it more of an organic process?
I'll let you take it, Professor.
You know, I don't, it's really, it's like a hard question to sort of even, as I was thinking about this question in advance, like, how do you choose who to reach out to? And I would say, you know, when you think about networking, there's sort of two approaches here, right? There's one approach, which is you kind of go out and sort of say, hey, I'd like to engage with you. I'd like to meet you, that kind of stuff behind it. And I think in general, a lot of that happens based on our current affinities. So it happens by the people we're already in the same groups of, we're already the same schools of, we work at the same places. So I think affinity is a really great starting point behind it. But I you know, that's hard because it's like, you know, there's like 50,000 Georgetown alums. And so that's hard to sort of figure out like how you even sort through within that one. That's why I think a little bit of what I've found is the best ways to sort of build my network. So you asked earlier about how I use LinkedIn and how I use social networks. So I post a lot of things. And what I always try to do is I follow like who comments on stuff and try to comment back. And then I go study them. And then I kind of reach out to network in it. So I would say the one way is I kind of trying to just like, you know, sort on affinities and do the best you can. But I think the other one is if you're sharing regularly and engaging in that kind of way and following stuff like that, I think finding who's attracted to your content, your ideas is a really good honing mechanism, right? It really, really quickly gets into that one. And I'll give you a quick example. I started using TikTok. So I'm not like a TikToker by trade, but I wanted to use it mostly to learn how to use it, right? That was my big experience behind it. And kind of Mackenzie and I talked about this before. We both had sort of been like, it's kind of interesting. Let's sort of see how it is. And I'm not nearly as adept at it as Mackenzie, but what's interesting is when you start sharing things. And so I'm sharing a lot about my journey as a novelist, a first-time novelist. When people engage on that one, then I know that they're kind of interested in that sort of thing. And so it sort of helps build that network. So going back to this idea of putting up signals, your content are these little signals, that these flags of what you're interested in. And I think it's like one thing to sort of look at like who, you know, I had 4,000 views of it, or I had 200 views of it, or whatever it is. But I think the more important thing is like who engages with it. And then can you carry on the conversation out of the public arena? And that's one of my favorite things is when I see someone who posts on it and I'll send a note in LinkedIn or I'll send a note in whatever and say, that was really cool. Thank you so much for that one. That's actually how you build networks. But that's, remember, how you would sort of do this in real life. So if I saw Mackenzie performing something at an event, I would go up to her afterward and say, I loved your performance. We should grab coffee, right? And that's like the way to think about these ones is like, if someone's performing, putting something on social network and you comment on how much you like it, and then you say, hey, we should talk more about it. That's the equivalent of what you can do in the digital arena. So that's my approach to sort of how you grow your network is be consistent, post stuff. But remember, 99% of the value that happens from social networks, I believe happens out of the public eye by how you engage with those people outside of it and follow up and share things. And that's really like kind of the secret. And that's, I think when you take this analogy of like, what would you do in the real world? It fits perfectly in it because that's how you would do it, how you would meet someone in real life.
And for me, I mean, a lot of what Professor said is very much in line with how I think about it too. But I'll add a couple of other things, right? You know, the obvious place to go is with people that you work with, etc. That's kind of the low-hanging fruit, the foundational layer, if you will, right? The people, the family, the friends, etc. But beyond family and friends, it's the professionals that you work with. They become part, especially LinkedIn. I mean, Facebook and Instagram are different, but for LinkedIn, if I just stick to LinkedIn for a minute, right, that's where we tend to go. But then there are these people that are inspiring, or they said something, or they engage with you in a certain way that 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 stuck with you, right? There are also people, and I see Rajesh, one of my dear friends and mentors, is also on, and few other people that I really enjoy working with and being with are on as the audience here. I just peeked over, and I remember Rajesh saying, "Is there somebody that you can help by making, through a small incremental effort, you can make a big difference in their life." So think about that, right? Through a small incremental effort, making a big difference. If I can do that, and there is a little bit of that exchange that can drive a connection that you didn't have before, why not, right? That becomes a new connection, and one that probably, I mean, I've seen some of those connections sustain for a long time because they tell you that you just made a difference in their life, but it was a very small effort for you, right? And LinkedIn is a perfect way. I mean, these social media networks are a perfect way to do it. So that's how I've tended to kind of look, when I grow my network, that's what has tended to happen. So
Totally. And what kinds of things, this leads great into the next question. What kinds of things can you say to make a difference in someone's life?
I mean, celebrate them, right? Like, I think I have, about a year and a half ago, I decided to say, hey, how cool would it be if I brought interesting authors in to come talk to us? And, amazing people from like, Dan Pink and Ariana Huffington and like Victoria Schwab all came. Every one of these people I'd never met before, but I always try to do the same thing. Is I actually try to spend time researching them, like what they care about, what they share about, and just simply acknowledging like that you appreciate what they've done and you're specific about it. I think that's the best way to start the conversation. So I always tell them, like, I'm a big fan of blank. And I try to be really authentic in it. Like, I look and figure out what it is, knowing that like that's something they put time and energy into. And if you can sort of tell someone what you appreciate, it's great. I think some of the interesting pieces to Satesh's sort of note there earlier, I think you can, like, the world is much more accessible than you might imagine. There's people who seem to be far rungs ahead of you that you can get in contact with by really being very authentic and by being very, kind of specific about it. So simply reaching out to someone and saying, hey, I saw your new book, and I have to tell you, like, chapter 5, like, there was a part in it that really impacted me. Like, that level of like, identifying something specific and ultimately identifying something that really helped you. I think people appreciate it. Now, whether or not that gets you a job or a relationship, like, who knows? But I would say the best things that I've found is to be as specific as possible. Like, this is specifically why I think you're a great person. And then also as personal as possible. And this is why it mattered to me. And that, I think those two things really matter a lot, of being able to be very specific of why them and then very specific of why you. And I think if you can do those things, that at least gives you a chance to have magic happen from there.
I would add one thing to what Professor said, right? Very often there is this instant, I want instant benefit from what I'm doing. And I think especially in social media, that's probably the wrong expectation to have. You do something for a person. Let's say you reach out to them, you tell them you appreciate them, you tell them how they have impacted you. Maybe they didn't respond. It's all right. That's okay. Put it out there. What I've seen happen is weeks, months, years down the line, they're reaching back out and saying, hey, you made a difference for me that day. How can I help you? It just happened to me yesterday night. I received this message saying, hey, you helped me this way. I see that you're writing a book. Can I help you? I was just amazed. It made my day, because it was just like, wow, I didn't even think about, the impact I had on this person. So as long as you celebrate them, you appreciate them, you find ways to help them, it all comes back, and it's a good thing, right? You have a strong network that way.
Yes. Awesome. This has all been I personally feel super helpful. It's given me new perspective, at least, especially in the like, how would you talk to someone in real life? So for the people watching, if you do have any additional questions, now is going to be the time where we start to pull questions from the chat. So, and the first one, and I think this is just so fun. Where's the hardest place that you ran a marathon? Since you've run multiple, which is more than most people can say.
Oh, I think I have two answers to this question. It's hard. It's a hard place because the landscape is challenging, right? It's also hard, even if the landscape is, perfectly normal. If you're not ready for it, then it becomes the hardest place that you've run. I'll give two examples. One is Antarctica, because it's just mind blowing that when you get there, it's in your head. It's not the landscape that really did it to you, but the fact that you're running in Antarctica and most people say, "What are you doing? What are you going to do? Where are you going to run?" So that's one, right? But then that was really challenging because it was a 3,000 foot kind of up and down that you had to kind of traverse. There was going to be a lot of wind coming and hitting your face, and then your head is like thinking, "What am I doing? Why am I running in Antarctica?" Right? Anyway, so that's one where it's really challenging. Physically, the landscape is hard. Everything around you is going to be a challenge. The second example I'd give is Mumbai. My doctor had said, because I had gotten hurt just a few weeks before the marathon. Now, if you realize what it's like to run a marathon, you train for months, and you're thinking, "Oh my God, I need to really run this because all this investment I've put in it." But then I hurt one of my legs, a few weeks before, but I was not ready to give up. I still flew to Mumbai against doctor's orders, ran the marathon, and completed it in good time. I will tell you, it was one of the hardest marathons I've run because my mind was there, it was ready to go, my body wasn't, right? But I willed it, I willed it to do it, right? So that's how I would respond to that.
I appreciate the nuance of your response.
Yes, as do I. Of course, this isn't necessarily an endorsement of not listening to doctor's orders, but I'm glad that you pushed through and ran your marathon.
Definitely. So we do have one final question for you guys, as we seem to have left our audience in stunned silence. What are your... Nope, that's not it. Final words of wisdom is the button I was trying to press. Anything you'd like to say to our audience members before you go?
Go ahead, Professor.
So I guess maybe my words of wisdom in this one is I think that, like, again, this is one of those important things that we all hear, this idea of like networking is important and brand building is important, all these things that are really important to do. That's like so important. I do think that like it's one of those things that you should treat it like, making time on your calendar to do this thing and closing it off and doing it. I think the thing that I found periods in my life when I spent a lot of time on like sort of social networking and on these things, that I found it to be like distracting. And so there's a guy named Cal Newport, who some of you may know. He wrote Deep Work, and he talks about like if you're going to use social networking, don't let it use you, you use it. And that I think is important, is like putting time on the calendar to do it, being disciplined about those things, because I think you can find yourself like literally checking it a lot. And one of the best things that I would tell you, if you want to see how to do that one, is to look on your phone, and it will tell you how many times and how many times you check your things. A good disciplining function is to say, on my calendar, I've got 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever it is, I'm going to use this time, and it'll not only be very productive for you, but it'll also like be one of those things that like it doesn't consume your entire waking life. And that I think is a good idea. Nobody's going to care if you respond within 30 seconds or if you respond within like 3 hours or 10 hours. So I think that's it. Like batch your time behind it, knowing that like consistency is important. So put time on the calendar and do it. But also remember, it works for you. You don't work for it. And if you do that, it's a lot more fun anyways.
Oh my God, I need that embroidered on a pillow.
So for me, it's be authentic and be yourself. That's about it. Because if you are that, then people will engage with you, people will respond, people will do things for you, and you do things for them, you celebrate them. It works really, really well. That's all I think I've tried to do on my social media networks. I'll stop at that.
So good. Thank you both so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for what
much
you guys
for
are doing.
having
This is
me. So
important. We
much.
appreciate you for being the hostess with the mostesses here today.
All right. You guys have a great rest of your day. And thanks again. What an awesome chat that was today. I found it super helpful.
Yeah, I learned so much. I think that contextualization of real world, because we are engaging with real people, in fact, that really does help with framing things.
Yes. We are not robots. Other people are not robots. Why would we treat them like that?
Period.
And also, I'm going to take away. Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was like, and because of the internet, there are bots, and you can figure them out. You can figure out who's a bot. Why? Because they don't treat you like a human. So it's like, it's all about, it all connects.
Totally. And I'm going to take away the use social media, but don't let it use you. Like, I'm going to write that on my chalkboard. Like, I need to look at that every single day because, wow. So, you guys, there will be another coffee chat this afternoon. Kyra will be back, and I will be back wearing these same outfits to do another coffee chat in just a little bit. If there are any additional topics that you wish for us to cover, or people that you would love to see us talk to, or if one of those people is you, feel free to reach out to us at any of the things below, the description, the comments, the little ticker at the bottom, etc. And we are happy to open a dialogue. Thank you so much for your time today and watching and tuning in live. We love to see it. And we will see you next time.
Bye, beautiful people.